The smoke rises in black columns that claw at the Hawaiian morning, thick and oily, blotting out the sun over Battleship Row. Amid the wreckage of capsized dreadnoughts and burning oil slicks, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stands on the bridge of his flagship, the carrier Agagi, and permits himself a moment of satisfaction. Below him, in the anchorage, 8 American battleships lie destroyed or damaged beyond immediate repair. The Arizona burns still, her magazines detonated, her crew entombed. The Oklahoma has rolled turtle, her hull exposed like the belly of a dying whale. The West Virginia settles into the mud, listing, bleeding fuel. Nagumo's pilots return in waves, their faces flushed with adrenaline and triumph, their combat reports detailing devastation that exceeds even the most optimistic projections. The strike has succeeded beyond imagination. The American Pacific Fleet, its backbone shattered in a single morning, will not threaten Japanese expansion for years, perhaps not ever. But amid the jubilation, one detail nags at Nagumo's staff officers. 3 American aircraft carriers assigned to Pearl Harbor were not in port. The Lexington is at sea, delivering aircraft to Midway. The Saratoga is in San Diego, completing repairs, and the Enterprise, the newest, the most capable, is returning from Wake Island, delayed by weather, steaming toward Pearl Harbor even now, unaware of the devastation awaiting her. The strike commander suggests a second wave, an expansion of the search perimeter to locate and destroy these missing flat tops. Nagumo considers, then he refuses. The primary targets have been obliterated. The battleships, the true measure of naval power, are burning hulks. Carriers, in the calculus of 1941, are auxiliary vessels, scouts and raiders, but not capital ships. They are not worth the risk of extending the operation. Nagumo orders the withdrawal. The Kido Butai turns north, its mission accomplished, its commanders confident that American naval power in the Pacific has been broken for a generation. They could not have been more catastrophically wrong. The absent carriers, those overlooked, underestimated vessels, would become the instruments of Japan's undoing, and among them, one ship would emerge as the embodiment of American resilience, a symbol so potent that Japanese admirals would come to speak her name with a mixture of fury and dread. She was USS Enterprise, CV-6, and over the next 4 years she would return, again and again and again. To understand the transformation that followed Pearl Harbor, one must first grasp what the Imperial Japanese Navy believed about naval warfare in December 1941. For decades, the decisive battle doctrine had dominated Japanese strategic thinking, the concept that a single climactic engagement between battleship fleets would determine the outcome of any Pacific war. This philosophy was enshrined in the writings of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, refined through years of war games and exercises, and validated by the only historical precedent that mattered, the Battle of Tsushima in 1905, where Admiral Togo's battleships annihilated the Russian fleet in a single afternoon. Carriers were useful for reconnaissance, for softening up enemy formations before the battleships closed for the kill, but they were not the main event. They were instruments, not warriors, tools, not warriors. The American Navy, in contrast, had begun its painful evolution toward carrier-centric warfare years earlier, driven by strategic necessity and the innovative thinking of officers like Admiral Joseph Reeves and Admiral William Halsey. But this evolution was incomplete in 1941. The carriers existed, yes, 7 of them in the Pacific and Atlantic fleets combined, but they operated in the shadow of the battleship admirals, their doctrine still emerging, their potential only partially understood even by those who commanded them. Pearl Harbor forced a brutal clarification. With the battleships sunk or damaged, the carriers were all that remained. They became, by default and by desperation, the sword and shield of American naval power in the Pacific.
USS Enterprise was not the largest of these carriers. That distinction belonged to Lexington and Saratoga, but she was the newest of the pre-war Yorktown class, commissioned in May 1938 and built with lessons learned from earlier designs. She displaced 19,800 tons, stretched 827 feet from bow to stern, and could launch and recover 90 aircraft in conditions that would ground lesser vessels. Her crew called her the Big E. Her captain, George Murray, described her as a ship with a soul, stubborn, vengeful, and lucky as hell. That luck and that soul would be tested beyond measure in the months to come.
December 8, 1941. Enterprise arrives at Pearl Harbor just as the sun sets over the devastation. Her pilots had encountered Japanese aircraft hours earlier, shooting down several in confused skirmishes that marked the first American aerial victories of the war. Now, steaming past the burning wrecks of Battleship Row, her crew stands silent on deck, watching the smoke rise, smelling the oil and cordite, witnessing the death of the old Navy and the birth of something yet undefined. Captain Murray receives his orders within hours: conduct offensive sweeps, locate enemy forces, attack targets of opportunity. There is no doctrine for this, no playbook. The battleships that should be leading the fleet are sinking into the harbor mud. The carriers must improvise, must become something they were never designed to be. Not scouts, but hunters. Not auxiliaries, but the main force. The Japanese High Command, monitoring American naval movements through submarine reports and radio intercepts, notes Enterprise's survival with mild irritation but no alarm. One carrier cannot reverse the strategic balance. One carrier cannot threaten the perimeter Japan is carving across the Pacific. The seizure of Wake Island, Guam, the Philippines, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies. The southern resource area falls like dominoes through December and into January, Japanese forces advancing with a speed and coordination that stuns the world. And through it all, the Kito Butai, Nagumo's carrier strike force, roams the Pacific unchallenged, raiding Darwin, attacking Ceylon, operating with impunity because no Allied force can match its concentrated power. But Enterprise does not concede the ocean. Through January and February 1942, she launches the first American offensive operations of the war, raids on the Marshall Islands, on Wake, on Marcus Island. The damage inflicted is minimal, the strategic impact negligible, but the psychological effect is profound. Japanese garrisons, told they were invincible, watch American carrier aircraft appear from nowhere, bomb their positions, and vanish before reinforcements arrive. The raids prove that the Americans are not paralyzed by Pearl Harbor, that they retain offensive capability, and that the Pacific is not yet a Japanese lake. Japanese naval intelligence begins tracking Enterprise with increasing attention. One carrier, yes, but one that refuses to behave like a defeated remnant. After each raid, she withdraws beyond retaliation range, her task force maneuvering with a caution born of desperation, but also with a growing confidence. The Americans are learning, and the Japanese, for the first time since December, begin to feel something unfamiliar: uncertainty. April 18, 1942. Enterprise is at sea, steaming in company with another carrier, USS Hornet, which carries on her deck a cargo that defies belief: 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers, twin-engine Army aircraft that have no business operating from a carrier deck. The mission is classified at the highest levels, but the crew knows something extraordinary is planned. Enterprise provides air cover while Hornet launches the Mitchells toward a target 650 miles distant, Tokyo. The Doolittle raid, as history will remember it, is a pinprick strategically, a nuisance raid that inflicts minimal damage on the Japanese home islands. But psychologically, it is an earthquake. The Emperor's palace, believed inviolate, is buzzed by American bombers. The sacred homeland, promised eternal protection by the military, is violated, and the carriers that launched this insult, the Hornet and her guardian, Enterprise, escape without loss. In Tokyo, the reaction is incandescent rage mixed with humiliation. Admiral Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor, demands immediate action to eliminate the American carriers before they can strike again. The result is the Midway operation, a massive, complex plan to draw out the remaining American flat tops and annihilate them in decisive battle. 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, Soryu, will form the core of the strike force, supported by battleships, cruisers, and hundreds of aircraft. The Americans, Yamamoto calculates, can field at most 2 carriers to oppose him. The odds are overwhelming. The outcome is certain. June 4, 1942, the Battle of Midway. Enterprise launches her air group at dawn, her torpedo bombers and dive bombers climbing toward the reported position of the Japanese carriers. The attack is uncoordinated, the torpedo squadron slaughtered by 0 fighters, but the dive bombers arrive at the perfect moment, just as the Japanese carriers are rearming and refueling their aircraft, their decks packed with ordnance, their damage control teams exhausted. Enterprise's SBD Dauntless bombers drop from 14,000 feet, their 1,000-pound bombs striking Akagi and Kaga with surgical precision. The carriers explode in cascading firestorms, their aviation fuel igniting, their magazines detonating, their structures collapsing into the sea. Within minutes, 2 of Japan's finest carriers are burning wrecks. Hiryu and Soryu follow hours later, victims of dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown. By sunset, the Kito Butai, the force that struck Pearl Harbor, that dominated the Pacific for 6 months, is shattered. 4 fleet carriers lost, hundreds of irreplaceable pilots dead, and Enterprise, damaged but operational, withdraws under her own power. Japanese admirals, reviewing the battle reports in stunned silence, begin to understand what they face. This is not the carrier they dismissed at Pearl Harbor. This is not an auxiliary vessel to be ignored. Enterprise has become something else, a nemesis, a symbol of American refusal to accept defeat. Vice Admiral Naganumo, rescued from the sinking Akagi, writes in his classified report, "The American carrier designated Enterprise displayed tactical audacity and operational resilience beyond expected parameters. Her destruction must be prioritized above all other objectives."
But destroying Enterprise proves easier ordered than accomplished. August 1942. The Solomons campaign begins, and with it, a grinding war of attrition around Guadalcanal. Enterprise is there, providing air cover for the Marine landings, her aircraft dueling with Japanese bombers flying from Rabaul. On August 24, in the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, she is found by Japanese scout planes and attacked by waves of Betty bombers and Val dive bombers. 3 bombs strike her flight deck, penetrating deep into her hull, killing 77 men and igniting fires that threaten to consume her. Her damage control teams, drilled relentlessly, trained to fight not just the enemy, but fire and flood, contain the blazes within an hour. By evening, she is recovering aircraft again. By the next morning, she is launching strikes. The Japanese pilots who return to their carriers report Enterprise destroyed, sunk, removed from the battle. Their commanders celebrate. Reconnaissance flights are diverted. Resources are reallocated. 2 weeks later, Enterprise reappears. The shock among Japanese naval officers is profound, bordering on superstitious dread. How does a carrier, reported sunk, return to operation? The answer lies not in magic, but in American industrial philosophy. Damage control as a core doctrine, redundancy built into every system, repair crews trained to improvise under fire. Japanese carriers, designed for offensive power, lack this resilience.
A single bomb in the wrong place can cripple them. But Enterprise and her sister ships are built to absorb punishment and continue fighting. They are not fragile instruments, they are anvils. October 26, 1942, the Battle of Santa Cruz. Enterprise, still bearing scars from the Eastern Solomons, faces the combined might of 4 Japanese carriers, Shokaku, Zuikaku, Zuiho, and Junyo. The battle is brutal, a carrier duel fought at the extreme range of naval aviation. Hornet is sunk. Enterprise is hit again, 2 bombs, 1 near miss that buckles her hull, casualties mounting, fires raging. Her forward elevator is jammed, her flight operations disrupted. Japanese reconnaissance reports her dead in the water, listing abandoned. Admiral Halsey, commanding from shore, receives the reports and prepares for the worst. Then Enterprise radios, "We are operational, launching cap." By nightfall, she is steaming at 20 knots, her flight deck patched with steel plates, her crew exhausted but defiant. She withdraws not in retreat, but in preservation, because she is the only operational American carrier left in the South Pacific. If she sinks, the Solomons campaign collapses. She does not sink. The pattern repeats through 1943 and into 1944. Enterprise is damaged, reported destroyed, and returns. She fights at the Philippine Sea, where Japanese carrier aviation dies in the Marianas Turkey Shoot. Her anti-aircraft gunners and combat air patrol pilots annihilating wave after wave of attackers. She fights at Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history, where the last remnants of Japanese carrier power are baited into a trap and obliterated. And through it all, Japanese intelligence officers track her movements with a fatalism that borders on resignation. In classified documents captured after the war, her name appears again and again. Enterprise confirmed sunk, followed weeks later by Enterprise sighted, operational. The repetition becomes darkly comical, a testament to the fundamental miscalculation that defined Japan's carrier war, the belief that sinking a ship once is sufficient. The symbolic weight of Enterprise's endurance cannot be separated from her physical presence. She was not just a carrier, she was a recurring reminder to the Japanese, to the Americans, to the world, that industrial democracies wage war differently. The Japanese build beautiful carriers, elegant ships designed for offensive supremacy, but they could not replace them. The Taiho, the Shinano, massive fleet carriers completed in 1944, were sunk on their maiden voyages, their crews untrained, their escorts inadequate, their loss irreplaceable. America, by contrast, built carriers by the dozen. Essex-class fleet carriers rolled out of shipyards every few months, each one more capable than the last. But even among this profusion, Enterprise stood apart. She was the pre-war survivor, the ship that should have died at Midway or Santa Cruz or the Philippine Sea, but didn't. Her survival was not luck, it was doctrine made manifest, the philosophy that resilience matters more than elegance, that endurance wins wars.
Her crew understood this. In letters home, in diaries kept against regulations, they wrote about the ship as though she were alive. Radio man James Bagwell recorded in January 1944, "The Japs keep saying they sank us. I guess we're ghosts then. Ghosts with bombs and torpedoes." Aviation machinist's mate Robert Gibson wrote after Santa Cruz, "She won't quit. Doesn't matter how many times they hit her. She just keeps coming back, like she's mad now." This anthropomorphization was more than sailor superstition. It reflected a deeper truth, that the ship embodied the will of the nation that built her, a democracy that refused to accept defeat because defeat meant the extinction of everything it claimed to represent. The Japanese admirals who laughed at American carriers in 1941 were not fools. They were products of a strategic culture that had evolved over centuries, a culture that prized decisive action, that believed wars were won in single climactic engagements, that viewed material attrition as dishonorable. But the Pacific War was not Tsushima. It was a grinding, relentless campaign of attrition where the side with more ships, more aircraft, more trained crews, and more industrial capacity would inevitably prevail. Enterprise, returning again and again from battles that should have killed her, was the physical proof of this calculus. She was not invincible. Her casualty list ran into the hundreds. Her hull bore scars from a dozen engagements, but she was inevitable. And inevitability in war is more terrifying than invincibility. By 1945, the Japanese combined fleet no longer exists as a fighting force. Its carriers are sunk, its battleships expended in suicidal surface actions, its aircraft grounded by lack of fuel and lack of pilots. Enterprise, in contrast, is off the coast of Japan, launching strikes against the home islands, her aircraft bombing factories and airfields with impunity. She is hit one final time, a kamikaze on May 14, 1945, that crashes through her forward elevator and explodes deep in her hull. 14 men die. The fires are contained in 12 minutes. She's launching aircraft again within an hour. By this point, the pattern is so established that the damage report is almost routine. Enterprise hit, Enterprise repairs, Enterprise continues operations. The war ends in August. Enterprise survives. Of the 7 American carriers that began the war, only she and Saratoga remain operational at its conclusion. The others, Lexington, Yorktown, Wasp, and Hornet, rest on the ocean floor, their names transferred to new hulls, their sacrifices honored, but their physical forms lost. Enterprise alone bridges the entirety of the Pacific War, from Pearl Harbor to Tokyo Bay, her service record unmatched, her battle stars numbering 20, more than any other American warship in history. But her survival comes at a cost measured not just in casualties, but in exhaustion. Her hull is a patchwork of welds and rivets, her machinery worn beyond peacetime tolerances, her crew rotated so many times that few who served at her commissioning remain aboard at her decommissioning. She has been reported sunk by the Japanese 13 times. She has been hit by bombs, torpedoes, kamikaze aircraft. She has burned, flooded, listed, and limped home under partial power more times than her engineers can count. And yet, she has returned, every time, without fail. In the immediate post-war years, efforts are made to preserve Enterprise as a museum, to enshrine her as the symbol she had become. But the political will is lacking, the funding insufficient. America, eager to demobilize and forget, sees her as a relic of a war it wishes to move beyond. In 1958, Enterprise is sold for scrap. Her hull is cut apart in a New Jersey shipyard, her steel recycled, her physical form erased. No museum, no monument, just memory, and the battle stars transferred to a new carrier, the nuclear-powered Enterprise, CVN-65, which will carry her name and her legacy into a new era. But the absence of a physical monument does not diminish what she represented. Enterprise was never just a ship. She was an idea made steel. The idea that democracies, when threatened, do not break. They endure, they adapt, they return. The Japanese admirals who laughed at American carriers in 1941 learned this truth too late in the burning wreckage of Midway, in the futile attacks on the Solomons, in the catastrophic losses at the Philippine Sea. They learned that wars are not won by decisive battle, but by the will to continue fighting after the decisive battle is lost, to rebuild, to return, to refuse defeat until defeat becomes impossible for the enemy to inflict. Enterprise embodied that will. Every time she reappeared after being reported sunk, she delivered a message more powerful than any bomb or torpedo, that the fight would continue, that American industrial might was not a temporary surge, but a sustained force, and that the Pacific, as vast as it was not large enough to hide from a nation committed to total victory. The Japanese Navy, built on the philosophy of the decisive battle, could not comprehend an enemy for whom no single battle was decisive, for whom every loss was temporary and every setback reversible. Enterprise, returning again and again, was the physical refutation of everything they believed about naval warfare. There's a photograph taken in September 1945 of Enterprise anchored in Tokyo Bay. Behind her, visible through the morning haze, Mount Fuji rises in silent witness. The ship's crew assembled on deck for a commemoration ceremony, numbers over 2,000 men, a fraction of the total who served aboard her during the war. They are young, most of them, boys who became men in the crucible of the Pacific. They do not smile for the camera. They don't need to. The mountain behind them, the conquered homeland of the enemy that swore to destroy them, says everything that needs saying.
The Japanese admirals who laughed at American carriers are mostly dead by this point, killed in action, lost with their ships, or awaiting trial for war crimes. Those who survive do not laugh anymore. They write memoirs, technical analyses, post-war assessments. And in these documents, one meme appears with a frequency that borders on obsession: Enterprise. They dissect her tactics, her damage control procedures, her operational endurance. They try to understand how a ship, reported destroyed so many times, kept returning. The answers they find are technical: redundant systems, trained crews, logistical support, but also philosophical. They confronted an enemy that did not accept the finality of defeat, that viewed every setback as temporary, that believed the war would continue until the enemy's capacity to wage it was utterly exhausted. This was the true power of Enterprise. Not her aircraft, though they were deadly, not her defenses, though they were formidable, but her refusal to stay sunk. Her insistence, embodied in every rivet and weld, that the fight was not over until America said it was over. And America, with its factories and shipyards, its training schools and supply chains, its democracy that mobilized an entire continent for war, America did not say it was over until the Japanese Empire lay in ruins. The symbolic object that recurs through Enterprise's story is not a weapon or a piece of equipment. It is the flight deck itself, that scarred, patched, bomb-cratered expanse of wood and steel that represented American resilience made manifest. After Santa Cruz, when 2 bombs had blasted holes through it, the crew laid steel plates across the gaps and resumed operations within hours. The plates remained visible for months, unpainted, raw metal against weathered wood, a badge of honor, a declaration that damage was temporary and mission was eternal. Pilots launching from that deck joked grimly that they were taking off from a jigsaw puzzle, but they took off, and they returned, and the deck, patched and scarred, received them. That flight deck, in all its improvised ugliness, was more eloquent than any propaganda poster. It told the Japanese Navy what they refused to believe until too late, that American carriers did not need to be pristine to be deadly, that resilience mattered more than perfection, that a damaged ship returning to battle was more fearsome than an undamaged ship hiding in port. Enterprise's flight deck became a symbol of democratic warfare, not elegant, not glorious, but effective and relentless and ultimately unstoppable. The epilogue of Enterprise is written not in the ship's scrapping, but in the legacy she left behind. Every American carrier that followed bore the lessons learned from her endurance: enhanced damage control, redundant systems, trained crews capable of fighting fires and floods in darkness and chaos. The supercarriers of the Cold War and beyond, massive nuclear-powered cities at sea, trace their lineage directly to the battered Yorktown-class flat-top that refused to die. Her name lives on, transferred from hull to hull, each new enterprise carrying forward the expectation that she will be tested, will be damaged, and will return. But more than technical legacy, Enterprise established a psychological template. She proved that wars of attrition favor not the side that strikes first, but the side that endures longest. The Japanese admirals who planned Pearl Harbor believed they could cripple American naval power in a single blow, that morale and will would collapse in the face of overwhelming initial defeat. They were wrong. Pearl Harbor did not break American will, it focused it. And Enterprise, steaming into Pearl Harbor on December 8th to witness the devastation, became the instrument of that focused will, the ship that would carry the counteroffensive from the ashes of Battleship Row to the decks of Japanese carriers burning at Midway, to the skies over Tokyo where the rising sun flag came down for the last time. The Japanese laughed at American carriers because they did not understand what those carriers represented. They saw floating airfields, auxiliary vessels, tools for reconnaissance. They did not see what Americans understood instinctively, that carriers were mobile projections of national power, that they carried not just aircraft, but the industrial capacity, the trained manpower, and the democratic will of a continent determined to preserve its freedom. Enterprise was all of this made manifest, a ship that embodied the promise that America, once committed to war, would not relent until victory was absolute. And so the contrails fade, the fires cool, and the Big E passes into history, not as a museum piece, which she deserved to be, but something more enduring, a story, a symbol, a reminder that the hardest victories are won not by those who strike first, but those who refuse to stop striking back. The Japanese admirals laughed at American carriers before the last cold ashes of Midway cooled. By then, they had learned what Enterprise had been teaching them all along, that laughter is easy when victory seems certain, but silence is the only response when faced with an enemy that refuses to accept defeat, that repairs every wound, that returns from every battle, and that will not stop coming until the war is won. Enterprise returned every time, and that, in the end, made all the difference.
But the lesson of the Ruhr endures, carved not in stone but in memory. It is a lesson about the terrible power of modern industry, about what happens when that power is marshaled for evil purposes, and about the even greater power required to stop it. It is a lesson about abundance and scarcity, about democracies that can outproduce dictatorships because their people work freely rather than in fear. It is a lesson about the moral complexities of total war, about the impossibility of keeping clean hands when fighting an enemy that has thrown away all moral constraints. The sky over the Ruhr is clear now, undisturbed by bombers or anti-aircraft fire. The silence where the furnaces once roared is complete, but if you listen carefully, in the wind that moves through the preserved factory buildings, you can still hear an echo of that night in March 1943. The distant drone of approaching engines, the wail of sirens, the terrible certainty that the age of invulnerability was over, and that what was once claimed to be safe would be leveled factory by factory, furnace by furnace, until nothing remained but ruins and the hard lessons written in their dust.